Hey everybody, it's Donovan. We're going to do a quick incident review from round 1 and 2 of our second season of our MX-5 league. Not too many uh, incidents were reported, thankfully, so we should be able to get through these pretty quickly. So let's start with the first one here. Now, keep in mind when we do these incident reviews that they are just for learning. If we decide to give a penalty, it does not mean we think you're a bad person or a bad driver. It's just something to learn from. So this is the start of the first race. Road Atlanta. Let's remove our essentials here. Remove the driving line. So here we go initially into the S's. It all looks fine. And then we kind of hit the curb here, slightly over rotate, hit the brakes, and then get hit from behind. So I don't think this is a penalty. And really, if we look at Frankie's perspective here, and Sean, who I think ended up hitting you, that's Frankie. Yeah, he had no place to go, right? I mean, Mark went a little sideways here. Hit the brakes to slow down to not further spin, but now you're in the middle of the track in an acceleration zone. So there's a high likelihood that you get hit, and I really don't think Frankie could do a whole lot, at that point. So, obviously, created a bunch of incidents behind that as well, but racing incidents and no penalties for that. So here we get a protest filed by Lee. Still, I think first lap. Yeah. So we'll see what happens here. Fighting there, and then unfortunately just got a little tap here from Vincente. If we look at Vincente's point of view, like Lee is pretty wide, bit of a later turn in, especially I think for lap 1. So the door is open, but really it's not alongside at turn in. Lee follows his line, which he's more than allowed to do. But then, as he cuts back, Vincente does hit him. Now it is on Vincente to back out of it at this point. We're not alongside at turn in, still really not alongside. But then there's this little touch here, and that spins Lee off the track. So I think for Lee, the learning here is that this is a risky maneuver. Like, yep, you're not at fault, but if this had happened to Andrew in a go-karting race, I would have yelled at him with my yep, not your fault, but it was your responsibility to avoid it. Doesn't change the penalty for Vincente, right? Because it was avoidable contact. You could have simply backed out. But I think Lee, there's no need for you to cut across that sharply here. It doesn't actually gain you a whole lot. You simply stayed on the outside, you'd have still had a pretty good run. You could have then moved over to the fence from Vicente if you wanted to, but you put yourself at risk here by cutting in like that. So sure, you have the right to do it, but it's a risky maneuver, right? So better to give it extra space and survive than the other way. Now again, I do think this is very much on Vicente. You were very clearly in view here. I can see that maybe from Vincente's point of view, he thinks there is overlap. So, it's a good try frame of reference to see when you have overlap. I mean, in reality, you're not even close, and therefore, it's a penalty, right? So now, even if there is overlap, right, and even if it is, you're entitled to be here. If somebody comes across, right, I think it still, behooves people to just at that point, play it safe. I mean, I personally try to back out of those if I can avoid an incident. Yes. No, sometimes you have to give the position, but better safe than sorry. Like, in our league, it's not that bad. But if you do iRacing, you typically get a lot of damage from hitting somebody like that. So, and as the league progresses, we will start bumping up the damage levels as well. So, be warned. I think just a small lift, or a little tap of the brakes and just try to get them in the next corner is always better than hitting somebody. Alright, so that was a penalty for Vincente. Hold on 1 second. Bradley said they can't see the pointer, which is true. I don't think we have been able to fix that yet from last time. It's been a while. See if I can. Yeah, I don't see a quick option there in here, so let's fix that for next time. But I think you guys have an idea when I talk about where there's room. Yeah, I do not see how to do that. I'm sure there's an option somewhere. But anyway, moving on to the next one. This here is just a learning moment. I think, for Josh. We did have a bit of a discussion here if this should be a penalty for anybody, but I really think this was just kind of a racing incident. So we have Josh here and Dylan. We get on the straightaway here. So let's go to Dylan's perspective. Dylan, there we go. Right, so here Josh is slightly defensive, which means he has a short, does not have the optimal line for this corner. As a result, there's a little bit of a slide there. Dylan has a run on Josh here. He's gonna pass Josh here, but obviously can't really move back. Goes to the inside. Now there's Josh, and there's Josh really doesn't. You don't really give enough space here. If you just look at the distance between your car here to the yellow line here. Had Dylan been on that line, there wouldn't have been enough space. So I think Dylan here is trying to give you that extra space. But when it comes off the curb, we'll understeer wide, and then there's a little tap there. I think from your point of view here, Josh, is you can see you go a little bit earlier than the cars in front, like Ryan. Is just to stay on the outside a little bit longer, try to do the over-under, get up the hill, just have more speed throughout the corner. Dylan is really kind of compromised being on the inside on this corner. By going inside here, Dylan can't really go anywhere. Even if he stays on his line, he's basically will drive off the track here where the curb ends. So by putting your car in this position, you know, you take the chance of the inside car coming to the outside and just having a tap there. Unfortunately, both of you spun. Racing incident, no penalties for either. But I do think this is one of those things with a bit more experience you can try to avoid. Worst case is, Dylan beats you into this corner and you can set up for a pass, after the S's. But there's nothing to gain here. You're not going to pass him on the outside if you guys are both shallow in. It's not going to happen. And if you're on the outside, where do the accidents happen? On the outside of a corner. So, all right. Next one is the first incident between Hayden and Lee. Okay, on the straightaway here, Lee gives a nice little bump and run. Has great overspeed with the slipstream. Puts a car next to it. I think Hayden here tries to give Lee as much space as possible, and unfortunately just dips a wheel in the dirt, and when he hits the brake, the car goes sideways a little bit, and collects Lee there. I think purely a racing incident. Hayden was not trying to pass. Lee, you gave plenty of space here. Nothing you did wrong here either. Hayden did make a small mistake, but not trying to pass you. Actually, is trying to give you space. And two cars in the wrong place at the wrong time. So, I hope you can see here, Lee, that Hayden did not, purposely take you out. It truly just, you're in the wrong place, unfortunately. Okay, next one I don't actually remember. Was protested by Ahmad. We did not give a penalty for it, I believe, so let's take a look. Oh yeah, I remember it now. Okay, so he was protesting this here, Jacob, for an unsafe rejoin, which I don't think was a rejoin. I think Jacob just lost control and tried to get control back, and unfortunately got collected by quite a few people. I'm not sure who's behind here. Ray. Yeah. I mean, at this point, you could be holding the brakes. Don't think it necessarily would have made a huge difference. If you were still sliding, you likely would have collected Ray. But it is something that we'd like to see. If you're spinning and you're out of control, is to hit the brakes and hold the brakes, so it's more predictable. And I don't think in this case it would have really made a big difference. But just something to be aware of for next time. All right. Here's the next one. We did decide to give a penalty on this. Lee has taken accountability for it. Did not mean to cause an incident, but due to timing, it ended up being an incident. Here is the point of view from Lee. Right, so Hayden makes a little mistake coming onto the straightaway. Stays out of the way, which I think is great. Like, like if you are slow, don't hop back onto the racing line. The racing line, is clearly, here. You can see where it kind of is. So I think Hayden, props to you for recognizing the mistake and just, staying on the outside here. This is when Lee wants to bust the tower, and yeah, I mean the road starts to, veer left a little bit there, and just clatters into Hayden. And you see from Hayden just starting to turn left because that's where the road goes. Um, yeah, as Lee said, like, he was a little bit hot under the collar from the incident before, but we saw that was just a, I think, pure racing incident. Uh, you know, let's try to learn from this. Let's not try to bust each other. The reality is that there is netcode. The closer you are to another car, the higher likelihood of netcode striking. Always give each other space. And if you have an issue with another driver, please come to us. We can review it. We will tell the driver something if needed for the next race. We can give warnings, etc. That's why we're here. We understand the passion, right? But let's take a deep breather. I mean, there's a reason why iRacing doesn't allow you to protest until half an hour later, right? So, all right. So yeah, that was a penalty for Lee. Next one. This was actually reported by Hayden, and it ended up being a penalty for himself. So let's take a look here. Going to the SS, was overtaken here by Frankie. Overtaken here by Ray. Nice pass here. Ray loses a little traction there. And then, and you have to be alongside a turn-in. Alongside is your front axle has to be at his rear axle, or ideally a little bit past it. You're clearly not alongside here, which means you have to back out of it as you go into the corner. That doesn't happen here, and as a result, you both do a pirouette spin together. Now from Ray's, like at this point, right, he is alongside you. Whether he should have backed out of it or not, right, we can always debate later. But once there is a car here, you can't just mindlessly keep turning into them, right? The car is not going to go away. At this point, you could have easily kind of straightened out, and turned around and straightened out the wheel and turned out of this. We need to give up a little bit of space here or speed here potentially. But it's an inside turn, so you'd have the advantage, just chopping across. When somebody is at this point alongside you, it's never going to end well, for you. So, just something to keep in mind for next time. So, this was a one-place penalty for Hayden, because it led to a spin. And it was avoidable contact. So again, had you been alongside a turn-in like this, what we see here, then that contact, if it would happen, would have been on Ray, right? Because he was required to give you space. But it has to be at turn-in, which is basically here, and we can see is that you're not far off, but you're not there. So I hope that makes sense. Okay. Right, next one, protested by Mark. Overall, didn't have too many protests in Brands Hatch. Start of the race here. Um, nice pass here from Mark on Jacob. And then gets clattered by Jacob as a result. So this is a one-place penalty for Jacob. I mean, there's plenty of space to go alongside it, but you also have to allow for the concertina effect here with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 cars in front of you, Jacob. Mark has to brake earlier. Also lap 1, he's more on the inside, so you have to anticipate, Jacob, if there's a car that is past you on the inside, is that they are gonna have to brake earlier. And in this case, there was also plenty of room. Mark pretty much keeps his position, and you actually, go to the inside here. I mean, here you are pretty close to the outside, and then you move over to the inside, and then take out somebody else. So, I think this is a clear penalty there. Alright, so Josh had asked for a review on this one as well. Now, there were a few other protests at Brands Hatch, but if I'm not going over them, they were deemed racing incidents. So if you look at this one, I think this was lap 1, Josh and Bradley. Bradley here comes on the inside, and here you can see he's on the inside. This is at turn in, and this is what we talk about being alongside. This is perfectly alongside, right? So that means at this point Josh has to give space, at least the cars with up to the white line, at all point in the corner, and he just cuts across Bradley very aggressively, which causes Bradley to spin out. Now, had it been like the incident just before, where Bradley was not alongside at turn in but got alongside during the corner, right? Then it was on Bradley. But in this case, Bradley just had no place to go. Now, I think in reality is that Josh never saw Bradley, because if you look at it, he's full in the blind spot here. This arrow on the right here, this red arrow, does show up, but it's very hard to see on the triples. So the rule of thumb we always use here, Bradley is very clearly in the mirror here, right? If that car suddenly disappears, right, that means they are basically close to alongside, and we can see that here. Now technically Bradley is not alongside here, right? But I think it's a good safety measure. Like he's either alongside or he's about to be alongside, because if he's able to go from here to being fully in a blind spot, that means he has an overspeed. So with every second, he's going to be further and further alongside. And in this case, you can see how far he is alongside at this moment. Now, for those of you that have been to my race clinic, you will know that I always recommend, if I were Bradley, I would have actually moved over more to make it more obvious to Josh that I'm there. Like, he really is in Josh's blind spot, so Josh cannot see him. And yes, you have the helicorsa, right? But it's sometimes hard to actually see that as you're in the middle of prepping for this corner and you're looking past the helicorsa. Right, so the closer you are, the more likely it is that the car you're next to will see you. Also, if there is contact at that point, it's simply just a little bounce, little tap, and nobody gets spun out. But this was definitely a one-place penalty for Josh. So, and I think there's just try to be just hyper aware of what's happening, especially in these laps, and give it a little bit of extra space. Like here, the line that you're on, right, takes away that car's width on the inside. If I'm not 100% sure, just always pick a line that is wide enough that gives that car's width there. Now if Bradley then goes out, okay, then it's on him because he's the overtaking car. But in this case, that space was not given. Okay. All right. This was protested by David against Daniel. Okay, Daniel will go for the overtake here. Goes to the inside, is alongside, right? So David has to give, that inside space, but Daniel has to stay on that inside, and kind of understeers wide into David here. And David goes off just a little bit. Now, this is a judgment call. Personally, I thought it was the racing incident, but the other three stewards voted as that it was on Daniel and should be a penalty. Now, the reason I felt it was a judgment call is that I think David could have given a little bit more space. Now, technically did give just enough, but just enough does create riskier, and then kind of we go to David's throttle here. Kind of accelerates almost off the track, so makes it look a little bit worse than it actually was. I mean, there was contact, but kind of drove himself off the track, I felt like. Ultimately though, you can see that Daniel's understeering here, gets away from this white line. The tap is there. One place penalty for Daniel. I think it was harsh, but sometimes you get outvoted. What can I say? All right. Then Josh had mentioned, and we did not get that protest for some reason. Another incident with Daniel later on. We'll take a quick look at that. Daniel, he's already done. There we go. Alright, Daniel trying to overtake Josh here. Now, this very clearly would have been a penalty, right? Normally. No, not alongside at turn in. Do you think Josh turns in just a little early? And it's close, but at this point Josh is turning in, and we're not alongside. Close, but not there. So then he taps Josh, but you can see here he lets Josh go by. He never actually takes the position. So because of that, there's no penalty there. Now Josh then said yes, but he kind of got an advantage still by being able to get on the accelerator before I did. So we took a look at it again, and if we look here, Daniel is doing 66 miles an hour. Josh is doing 67. So I do not think that Daniel was able to out-accelerate you. In fact, he's behind you the entire time. Now, you brake late here. You can see how Daniel is braking earlier. As a result, you go wide, and then you cut underneath. Now, here is where Daniel will receive a warning for blocking. Daniel picked the inside here, which is technically one move. So you can open it up for the next corner, but there is no next corner. We're going to start finish. So really, Daniel should have stayed on this side here. Cuts across Josh. Josh gains a little bit of overspeed here, and Daniel cuts back. Now, as we can see from Josh's throttle input on the left here, he had to take no avoiding action really, although he moved a little bit to the left here. Was able to stay on the throttle the entire time. As a result, we'll call this a warning, no penalty. But keep that in mind, is that you can't really swerve in front of somebody else. Had just had to brake to avoid you, it definitely would have been a penalty. So I think you kind of got lucky there. Just keep your line, especially since it's the run to the finish. You had such overspeed here that you would have won regardless. So all right, that concludes our incident review. Overall though, it was really great racing. I look forward to the next race in a few weeks time. Kind of as usual, the point of this is to learn from it. At the end of last year, the racing was very, very clean. The cleaner it is, the more fun it is for everybody. Always try to, give the other person some grace, right? The reality is none of us are professional racers. Nobody typically hits people intentionally. We've all made mistakes, right? Nobody is perfect. We've all hit other people by accident. So if you give each other space, you place your car in the right spot, then these incidents become less and less and less and less, and the more fun everybody will have racing together. All right, thank you all for listening, and